On the show last week, I interviewed San Francisco Mayor London Breed, who's leading the city during a deadly fentanyl crisis and is now facing a tough re-election campaign and an impatient voting public concerned about community health and public safety. But with drug dependency and illegal and dangerous drug markets, there are no fast and easy answers. This week on the show, I talk with James T. Morrison, a writer in his early 40s who lives in Fresno, California. He started his adult life in a tenuous cycle of mental health crises and living between the streets, shelters, and hospitals along the Central California coast, and he nearly died of a drug overdose. I first learned about James in a piece he wrote for Slate about his path to using and about why he calls for government-sanctioned manufacturing of drugs for a safer drug supply. James is married now and a grad student in writing at Fresno State. He's managing his sobriety with Suboxone and prescribed psychiatric medication. We've done many episodes over the years on Death, Sex, and Money about addiction and recovery, particularly about the destructive and deadly toll of opioids on people and communities. There are links to some of those episodes in our show notes, and in my newsletter this week, I'm writing about some other great reporting that's informed and updated my thinking about the best way to help users get healthy and to keep communities safe. James has been an opioid user. For him, drug use started with popping more than his prescribed anxiety medications when he was still a teenager. And we discuss, or joust really at some moments, about different interventions and approaches to stem the cost of drug addiction. He and I also talk about his history of suicidal ideation and his hospitalizations for suicide attempts. And so while part of what we talk about is the patchwork nature of care for mental health and addiction, how it can definitely be hard to navigate, I also want to urge that if you or someone you love is struggling with thoughts of suicide, please reach out and call 988, the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
I won a gold medal from DARE for being the absolute best at not doing drugs. So that's 12.
Yeah.
And by 14, I would take any pill someone handed to me if they told me it was going to make me feel better.
This is Death, Sex, and Money. The show from Slate about the things we think about a lot and need to talk about more. I'm Anna Sale.
Be warned that once you pick up a refreshingly cold drink from McDonald's and people see just how refreshingly cold that drink from McDonald's is, you may create drink envy. Because there are drinks, then there are drinks from McDonald's.
For a morning brew that really creates a stir, get any size iced coffee, including caramel and French vanilla, for just 99 cents before 11 a.m. Price and participation may vary, cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
James T. Morrison grew up near Santa Barbara, California, the youngest of 3 boys. His 2 older brothers were much older. James was a surprise. And as he grew up, he said there was a lot of attention on him and how he was doing. Maybe too much attention.
I've had, mental health stuff since I was really young. I started seeing my first therapist, I think I was 5. I had pretty bad OCD. It was just really loud upstairs. So finally, instead of psychologists, we started seeing psychiatrists. And at 13 or 14, the psychiatrist prescribed me Xanax, and I started taking more than I should have that day.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, right away.
Like more than directed secretly?
Yeah.
Why?
Because it was the first time that I had felt comfortable, maybe ever. It just didn't feel like I was 100% on guard all the time, whether I was alone or with someone.
And more felt better than just taking what you were prescribed?
Yeah, I think, it was built in that 1 is good, 2 is better. I feel like that was just an innate thing in me, I guess.
And so you took more than prescribed, and you described this feeling of ease that was something you had never felt before.
Yeah.
Did it feel like a numbing, or did it feel like a clattering part of your brain that caused you discomfort was soothed?
Yeah, I've never really, I hear people say the word numb. That's never really been my experience. Numb is not a thing that I felt. Maybe alcohol, like physically numb to my face, and cocaine, I guess. But as far as like feeling like I was numb, it wasn't like that. It was more like a a switch that was on permanently was turned off.
And then you would need to take more to keep the switch down.
Yeah. I graduated pretty rapidly from like a lower dose of Xanax to like, I mean, this was sort of when they were first starting to give, well, not very first, but like, so we're thinking early 90s, like kids are starting to go on medication a lot more often. And it's sort of like less charted territory, not totally uncharted, but it's definitely less charted. And so it never really fully took care of the problem. And I wish that it would. And I think that's why I sort of kept taking them, was like it's quiet, but it's not absent. And so, I kept getting prescribed more and more. At one point unless I guess the pharmacology of these drugs, you don't really know, but like I started getting prescribed 90 Klonopin a month.
That's
by the
a
time I
lot.
was like 15, it's a lot. It's a lot. And I was going through it in like no time.
Uh-huh.
So
Looking back, do you think you received good care, medical care?
I'm always very reticent to like blame anyone or say good care or bad care. Do I think that they had my best interest at heart? Yeah, I do. And I think my parents did too. Like, I don't think that anybody had malicious intent or was acting in any kind of like, out of anything except for what they thought was going to work for me.
Mm-hmm. And I want to just understand a little bit more about why you started taking Xanax. Was it difficult for you to function?
Yeah, I mean, pretty difficult. Yeah. Like, so this is something I go back and forth with too, is like, I don't know what anyone else's experience is, right? I only know my own experience. So my experience could be the same as everyone else's. And and maybe I'm worse at dealing with it or something. But life was hard all the time. I'm on a good regimen right now, like a good cocktail, and life has been a lot better. But I mean, last summer I was like spiraling into a mental health crisis that I hadn't dealt with. Like, I was wondering if I was going to have to go back to the hospital, which I hadn't been in 20 years.
Uh-huh.
And so, but yeah, I mean, life was like, that's a long answer to a short question. Yeah, life was difficult.
Yeah. So you started taking Xanax more than was prescribed. Did anybody in your life know that you were taking more than the doctor told you to?
Not at first, but yeah, eventually, like, my mother was a very, very strict person, especially when it came to drugs. So she started like sort of taking them from me and doling them out to me, but I would like find ways around that. I'd find where they were.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you, by the time you were a teenager, you had an older brother who the family was aware had gotten into drugs, and your mom knew that. And do you think of like the doling out drugs as her trying to figure out how to control the situation with you to prevent what your brother had gotten into?
100%.
And it didn't work?
Not at all. I backfired horribly.
As James got more into using as a teenager, both drugs and alcohol, things got tense with his family. There were big fights. He'd get in trouble with the cops. He lived with his mom, then his dad, and sometimes didn't have any housing at all.
I was in and out of a lot of sort of facilities. Like, I would be at the rescue mission. So there's two sides to rescue missions. There's like the unhoused side, and then there's like the recovery side. And so, I was in the recovery side 3 different times until they finally kicked me out for good. But there were other kids like me, and they showed me like, how to get up on the roof to sleep at like the outdoor mall, or like where to not like, because especially back then, and they're doing it again now, they're really criminalizing homelessness. Like, if you weren't up and out by the time the sun came out, like, you were at risk of getting a ticket, which you weren't going to be able to pay, which was eventually going to you'll wind back in jail. So.
Mm-hmm. James was in his late teens and early 20s during this period, cycling through jail, shelters, and the streets around Santa Barbara, California. One night, he was doing drugs with strangers in a motel room, and he overdosed. The people he was hanging out with dropped his body off outside an ER. Doctors say he narrowly avoided death. James also ended up in the hospital over and over again because of mental health emergencies.
I was hospitalized at least 5 or 6 times. I was doing drugs wherever I could get them. I was drinking whatever I could get alcohol, but really it was just like I was just out of control in every sense of the word.
You were really sick.
Really sick.
And what kind of drugs were you using during these years?
I mean, whatever I could get my hands on, really. I've always been someone who prefers like opiate/opioid medications, whether it's, street, like heroin or I'm a real big pill popper. That was my main thing. But yeah, so benzos, opiates, but also, like crystal meth, and I would do anything and enjoyed everything. Like there wasn't anything that didn't suit me.
What led to the hospitalizations? Did you get picked up or did you go to the ER?
Yeah, well, there was like, it's hard to say this, but there were suicide attempts. Some like, when people are really serious about that, it often, that's it. They don't tell people, they just like go do it, when they get to that point. I was someone who was more like, but I almost died too. So I don't know. It's hard to say. But anyway, suicide attempts was what brought me in.
And were you just trying to say like you were really looking for help?
Yeah, and I didn't know what that meant. I actually ended up feeling safest in the hospitals. Like I felt like I just did not have to deal with the world. Institutions were kind of like a respite for me, to be honest. Like it was because like they would give me these heavy sedatives and I would just sleep like 22 hours a day.
Were you afraid to die?
No.
Is that hard to say?
I mean, I guess if I'm being totally honest, like this is another subject that's people find really hard to talk about, but some of us struggle their whole lives with suicidal ideation, and I'm one of those people. I'm someone, even when things are really good, I'm still probably going to think about suicide at least a few times a day. And that's just a reality for me. It's not something I'm going to act on. It's not meant to scare anyone. That's why it's not something that I bring up very often. Like it's something that like my partner knows, but like I said a year ago, that's why I thought I was going to have to go back to the hospital. Like I was starting to get actually afraid, like, cause the bottom line is like, I am afraid to die in some sense. I must be. And like, I don't want to die. It's funny because like there's this paradox. Like I also have health anxiety. I think about suicide and I also get scared I have cancer, like doesn't make any sense at all. So like, but yeah, I don't know. It's not really hard for me to say. Like I think I knew I wasn't going to do it myself, but I wasn't super worried it was going to happen.
And this might be, like, this question is me trying to untangle something that maybe isn't untangleable. Like, what do you think the relationship was between your use of drugs and your mental health?
So what's interesting is that wasn't my period of heaviest drug use, like by a long shot. And so, for me, it has always been about sort of getting a break from what goes on in my head. But I also am very reluctant, like, it's something that people always say about people. I shouldn't say people, that's such a general statement, but on the whole, addicts are not popular. We are not a popular group of people. And we're always being accused of blaming our problems on something else. Right. And so like, I'm always very cautious to like say, yeah, I use because like, I have mental health problems or whatever, like, because that is an excuse. So I am responsible for my own choices, but also 100%, the reason I started using again after not using for a while was it was always because it was like, oh yeah, like it doesn't always have to be like this. Like it doesn't always have to feel this way.
Mm-hmm. Drugs felt good.
Yeah, I mean, just gave me a break. And like you can define functioning however you want. Obviously, between the years of like 17, 18, and 21, I was not functioning at all. But I don't even know that like drugs were a part of that, but they weren't the reason for that. Like that was just me having a serious mental health crisis.
Coming up, James and I take a look back at that really hard stretch in his early adulthood and discuss whether anything could have helped him stabilize sooner.
A large reason why drugs have the effect they have on people is because of the way that we treat them and the way that we approach certain drugs versus other drugs.
This message is sponsored by Greenlight. Summertime is supposed to be an opportunity to slow down, but sometimes you can't help but notice that time is moving fast. Like if you have kids, maybe you're thinking about the new grade they're starting soon. Maybe they're getting older, a little taller, maybe even a little wiser. And to help continue learning and build independence over the summer, and to stay connected as they start spending more time out of the house, check out Greenlight. Greenlight is a debit card and money app for families. My rising third grader has a debit card from Greenlight, and she just used it the other day to buy a new pair of sandals. And then I could show her in the app how spending that money affected her balance that she'd built up from her weekly allowance. She also has a savings account in Greenlight, and I can add a few percentage points of interest to show her how that works. And then there's a separate bucket for money to share to help us encourage a habit of giving to charitable causes early. There's also Greenlight's Infinity Plan, which includes all the financial literacy education that makes Greenlight a valuable resource for millions of parents and kids, plus built-in safety to give you peace and mind. With Greenlight Infinity, teens can call for help when they need it with SOS alerts that connect them to family members, 911, or both. Greenlight is an easy, convenient way for parents to raise financially smart kids and for families to navigate life together. You can sign up for Greenlight today and get your first month free when you go to greenlight.com/DSM. That's greenlight.com/DSM to try Greenlight for free. Greenlight.com/DSM. I get really stressed out about the amount of plastic that comes in and out of my house, even when I'm really trying to reduce how much plastic we use. And Blue Land makes it easy to cut back. With products that I have to use, like laundry detergent or dishwashing soap or hand soap or toilet bowl cleaners, Blue Land sends you containers that you can reuse and refill, which means we use less plastic in our household. The idea is simple. It's refillable cleaning products with a beautiful, cohesive design that looks great on our counter. Just fill the reusable bottles with water, drop in the tablets, and wait for them to dissolve. You'll never have to grab bulky cleaning supplies on your grocery run. And all Blue Land products are made with clean ingredients that you feel good about. Blue Land has a special offer for listeners of Death, Sex, and Money. Right now, get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/DSM. You don't want to miss this. blueland.com/DSM for 15% off. That's blueland.com/DSM to get 15% off.
No matter what you're going through, you are never alone. Join me on my podcast, From the Heart with Rachel Brathen, every Friday. Each episode is like sitting down with your best friend for a cup of coffee. From self-care tips to inspiration for healing, this podcast offers the chance to return to nature, return to community, and return to who you are at your core. Straight from my heart to yours. Listen to and follow From the Heart with Rachel Brathen on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Death, Sex, and Money from Slate. I'm Anna Sale. After James overdosed and nearly died in his early 20s, he got into treatment. Not really by choice. He was forced to by the courts. It was either that or a year in county jail after he'd been picked up so many times. So he worked in a kind of religious labor camp for people in recovery. His job was to make food for firefighting crews. And he stayed sober through that, about 8 months. Then he lived in a halfway house and went to 12-step meetings. And then he met a guy who became his roommate, and they started using together, heavily. This guy was from the East Coast.
My sick thought was like, yeah, I'm finally going to get to go to the East Coast and like shoot dope. That was like our goal, was to like get to the East Coast. I had just gotten a car, this little Geo Metro. And so we left, never even wound up finding any opioids at all. Ended up like just in what had been my girlfriend's apartment, which ended up being his girlfriend's apartment by the end of it all, like just smoking meth, which wasn't even my favorite thing to do, but that's what it was. And like at that point, like that's really the moment where I was like, okay, I don't want to do it this way anymore for sure. Like this is whatever I do, however I do it, this is not the way I want to go about it. And so like I checked myself back into the hospital. And while I was in the hospital, I sort of had the realization that like, all right, you can go one of two ways here. Like you can keep doing it the way you're doing it right now, or you can try something different. And so what I did was I had a bunch of friends living up here in Fresno. It was a flop house, basically a bunch of artists, really cool people. And I went up to Fresno and like, I don't know, got a job and started paying rent, which was like $95.
That's another reason to go to Fresno, I guess. The housing at the time was affordable.
At the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's less so now. But.
Yeah. And was your intention to get to Fresno, get a job, and stop using, or was it to just have a different life structure?
Yeah, just to do something different somewhere different. But you know, as soon as I got there, like, you know, I found the guy who sold fentanyl lollipops and like was getting into that a little bit, and then I met my partner / wife, and I was like, okay, I want to take it a little slower because this is kind of nice. Like, I like this person. Maybe I don't want to like run it into the ground.
Mm-hmm. And tell me if you don't want to talk about this, but when you met your now wife, were substances something that she had a complicated relationship with? Is that something you shared?
Not at all.
Or I see.
Not at all.
Did you try to
like
hide
the complete opposite
the way you struggled, or?
I was very honest and upfront with her about what I had been through and where I had been. Like we got that out of the way real quick because I didn't want to like mess around and like get 6 months into something and then be like, oh yeah, I spent the last like 3 years in jail and mental hospitals and I have a drug problem and all this stuff. And so I did tell her, you know, well, because she like I used to self-harm and I have scars. And so she asked me about the scars and that just sort of led to me telling her everything. And she did, like, to my surprise, like I didn't get rejected, but she was especially then a very straight and narrow person. She had maybe gotten drunk a handful of times in her life. And she was very much like a stable individual.
Uh-huh. Okay. And this is kind of a broad question just to like look back on that period before you moved to Fresno. Because I think something that, you know, policymakers and the general public, like there's a lot of debate about like, what are the proper interventions to force people like you in that time to change what you're doing to make more healthful decisions for yourself and also make decisions that have less public cost. Looking back, like, is there an intervention that was imposed on you that you feel like that was what I needed and I think it was the right move? Or do you think that more it was like you just had to wear yourself out?
I think you used an interesting word. You used the word force.
Uh-huh.
Force people.
Yeah.
Never can you force someone to, like, get better. Like, you can sort of, like, what we don't do right now for the most part is meet people where they're at. That's like what we don't do. We don't sort of, like, we decide that, like, the best thing for you is to be totally sober and to be on the regimen of medication we want you to be on, and then we're going to give you more help, right? Which is fully backwards. I think that it's interesting the way that we treat drugs in general, and like how, because of course there are deleterious effects from drug use is undeniable. And we can see right now how many people are dying and living on the street and all that stuff. But, like, when you really break it down, how much of that is due to, like, the black market and the fact that, like, everyone is shunted off into these liminal spaces to, like, both collect and use their drugs and hang out with other people who are in the criminal world, who don't hold jobs, who exist in this entire economy. I mean, it's a high percentage. I mean, I don't know that we can implement, like, something that would work, and I don't know what would work. This is so complicated. And people always want to simplify it. The thing that I think is interesting is rarely do we get asked, like, hey, what would be good for you? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like what would help you? It's always like, okay, you're obviously ruining yourself and ruining your life, and, like, we need to make sure that you stop doing that. And that creates so much shame in people. It creates so much guilt in people, because that's, like, why they end up hiding and being so, like, full of that self-hatred that sort of drives a lot of drug dependence is I mean, not solely due to how we treat drugs, but I mean, it is a lot.
You're saying the sort of the way that the public conversation around illicit drug use, maybe in particular opioid use, the way that it shames the user, that in your experience, like, compounded part of, like, this is another reason I want to use. Like, this makes it harder to not use because I feel useless.
Yeah.
Let me try another word where I don't say force.
Okay.
And see. And that is, like, if you thinking back on that time, do you think that there were interventions that made using less comfortable, so it added more of a cost to counterbalance how good it felt to be on drugs? Like, are there ways that it could have, some interventions to just make it more of a pain, that it was just like, I'm tired. It's exhausting.
Wait, are you asking me if, like, making people's lives harder would help them get off drugs?
Yeah. While they're using.
No.
And so, okay, you put that very bluntly and clearly. If say you had been is there anything what would have helped you? Is there anything that would have helped you build some stability in your life sooner, do you think? A different kind of intervention?
I mean, it's complicated. The reason why things got better for me is I decided I wanted to try something different, that I wasn't into it. But I also think that, like, I sometimes wonder how much all of this is, like, you know, I got told from a really young age, something's wrong with you, you know? And I think there is, like, I do have mental health issues, but, like, I also think that, like, the way that I was steered towards this thing and not towards this thing, and do this and don't do that based on sort of arbitrary distinctions between this drug and that drug, or this way of doing things or that way of doing things. I mean, I think that honestly is like part of the problem.
And so, I mean, I hear you. And then I also think I like try to think about if I'm a public official, if I'm the mayor of San Francisco, or if I'm a parent who lives in Berkeley, which I am, and like you can see the effects on the rest of the community when there's, sort of rampant illicit drug use out in the open, like how it makes people kind of recede from community space, how it makes community space, dirtier, less pleasant to be in, potentially less good for public health. What would you have them do, like to address those costs?
Again, this is a very complicated issue.
I know.
And it's true that, I mean, like I said at the beginning, I take full responsibility for my actions. I've hurt a lot of people. I've done a lot of work on myself, and I've made restitution as much as I possibly could. Like, I've done all these things. So like, it's not like I don't understand what it looks like to see what's happening right now. But I do think, again, like saying rampant illicit drug use, right? Like, I think it looks the way it looks because of how it's been treated this whole time. I don't know that it would look the same. And look, I don't know this. I have no way of knowing this. And I'm not like, this is a very libertarian. I'm not a libertarian. This is a very libertarian argument though. Like I would imagine that if you could procure clean, safe drugs, from like, and not even regulated by business, like even with cannabis, we're seeing how out of control that's getting, like how much we're seeing just the cycle of capitalism sort of eat that up. But I would imagine if we could find a way to dispense clean drugs to people and also not be constantly telling people the only way to be a better human is to stop using drugs, that I don't think it would look the way it looks right now. I just don't. I really think it would look different. Like right now, we just have to clean up the drug supply. There's just no, like, I don't care. That is the only sure way right now to save lives. It's like, it may not be feasible. It may not be something anyone wants to do. It may be like a serious third rail. But if you actually wanted to save lives, if that was the goal, you would have to clean up the drug supply.
Which
all
is
of it.
Easier said than done.
Well,
how do you clean up the drug supply?
By manufacturing it as a country and giving it to people who need it.
Mm-hmm. So I think that I'm understanding in your sort of worldview. So I've got 2 kids who are in elementary school. And I think about like when they get to middle school and drugs start being around, and I think about what the drug supply is around them now compared to when there were drugs around me when I was a teenager, and it's terrifying. And
absolutely. I'd be dead 100 times over, without a doubt.
Yeah. And I hear you saying 2 things. I hear you saying having a parent say, you should be terrified to get close to drugs, and I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you from trying them to protect you. I hear you saying that didn't work for you. You wouldn't recommend that parenting approach.
It doesn't work for anyone.
And I also hear you saying, hopefully, Anna, by the time your kids are in middle school, there's government-sanctioned manufacturing of drugs to provide a safe supply so that the illicit supply is less present. Like that's sort of the ideal of that, how I could keep my kids safe.
I mean, look, the idea that you're going to stop them from
I feel very fearful that that's not going to happen.
Well, no, of course it's not going to happen. No, that'll never happen. This is a pipe dream. Like I know what our government is and isn't capable of. We can't even get the most minimum shit done for anything. The idea that we would suddenly like turn the Titanic around in a bathtub over how we view drugs is just the dumbest shit ever. But like what you're saying, right? Like
I don't want my kids to die.
you
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I hear that, of course. I don't have kids. I'm never gonna have kids. Like I got a vasectomy. Like part of me, like my life, the way that my life has gone, like I'm glad to have gone through this journey and I'm glad that I'm still going through this journey, but it is not something that I would want to bequeath on someone else. But like so we're talking about two scenarios then, right? So we're talking about scenario one is where you try to tell your kids never to use drugs and fail. And then they go and use the current drugs that are out there, thinking it's one thing when it's actually another, and they could potentially overdose, right? Or option two, which actually demystifies drugs in a huge way. I think that we actually do a disservice by making them seem so like scary and bad. It's like, that's what teenagers want to do. Like, of course, that's what they want to do. They want it, like, their brains aren't fully, like, they're not fully formed. They're not risk averse the way that adults are. So like by making it this scary thing that's like very much in popular culture in a lot of different ways as like this is the thing the cool kids do, you know, like I think you take some of that mystery out of it, honestly, if it was in some dull facility, you know what I mean? Like some gulag like type pharmacy where you had to like go and procure your pure substances, you know, like I mean, look, there's like, I just think that like, wouldn't you rather have your kid get a hold of that than the drug that they're inevitably going to get a hold of later if they want to do drugs? Not all kids want to do drugs. My wife, not interested in drugs. She has a glass of wine and is like toast. I don't understand how that works personally, but like, that's how she is. So it's like, that's the thing we need to realize is like the kids who aren't going to do drugs are probably not going to do drugs anyways. And the people who are going to do drugs are eventually going to do drugs. And so trying to stop the people who are all you're doing by scaring people is reinforcing the thing they already weren't going to do for those kids. And then making for the other kids who are going to use, you're making something seem just super attractive.
Coming up, James tells me what finally changed for him that's helped sobriety stick.
I don't have any desire to go out and do anything like what I used to do. I don't want to drink. I don't want to go use drugs, whether they are available or not. It's just not something that I don't feel like flushing my life down the toilet.
I'm David Remnick, host of the New Yorker Radio Hour. There's nothing like finding a story you can really sink into that lets you tune out the noise and focus on what matters. In print or here on the podcast, the New Yorker brings you thoughtfulness and depth and even humor that you can't find anywhere else. So please join me every week for the New Yorker Radio Hour, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, I'm Josh Levine, one of the hosts of Slate's weekly sports show, Hang Up and Listen. Every Monday, I'm joined by Joel Anderson, who you might know from Slate's Slow Burn podcast, and Stefan Fatsis. This summer, we'll be diving into the Paris Olympics, watching Simone Biles, Sha'Carri Richardson, and Victor Wembanyama, obsessing over track, team handball, and breakdancing, and talking about the Olympic Committee's Russia ban and sex testing in elite sports. Check out Hang Up and Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
By the time James was in his mid-20s, he was living in Fresno. He had a steady job at Trader Joe's and was thinking about the future. He still took pills when he could, got them from people at work. But what was different from a few years earlier was that he didn't want to keep using. It had lost its appeal. But just quitting? That wasn't easy.
So I wanted to stop using so much. I would say 2 years probably before I stopped doing what I was doing. I wanted to stop doing what I was doing. And I wanted to get on Suboxone, which is what I'm on now. I've been on Suboxone for 7 years.
Uh-huh.
It's been a life-saving medication for me. But I wanted to get on Suboxone. I called clinics, but at the time it was like, just to get started, it was $500. And then it was like $800 to $1,000 a month to keep going.
Out of
where I'm
pocket for
buying
you?
Out of pocket. Suboxone is covered now, thank God, but it wasn't covered then. It was just like initially coming out. And so maintenance medication really works for me, and it really works for a lot of people. And that's even something we have to argue about like whether or not it's okay to give people maintenance meds, whether or not we're just enabling them by like giving them drugs. Like I went off the Suboxone for 4 months, and it was hell. And like I couldn't function. And then I got back on it, and like life got back on track, and I got back on my other psych meds, and like life got back on track. I just think that like this idea that we have of like what is and isn't okay for people to do to like, I don't know, survive is just, it's so odd to me. It's just such a weird thing.
Mm-hmm. And when you finally got access to Suboxone, like how did you get it? Do you go to a doctor's office or do you go to a clinic? What's it look like?
So, this is where my health anxiety helped me. I had been drinking very, 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 very heavily for a long time and taking a lot of drugs on top of it. And according to Google, Dr. Google told me I was dying based on the symptoms that I was having, right? And so like I go, that's the way I read Dr. Google.
Yeah, you're like, my body feels bad, and you look at symptoms and you're like, oh, I have a life-threatening illness.
Exactly. Like I've my organs are shutting down as we speak. I don't have long to live type thing. I mean, and look, the amount, it wouldn't have been totally like out of the question for that to happen.
Yeah.
But like I was flipping out, and we're on the way to the doctor, and my wife is like, dude, what is wrong with you? Like, why are you so worried? Because she doesn't know what I've been up to. She kind of knows, but not like she doesn't know about any of the drugs.
Oh, you were secretly using all that time?
Oh yeah, all that time. No, none of my friends do. No, like none of my friends were drug users. None of my friends were any of that. Like this was all on my own, like just under the radar, like fully, functional, whatever you want to, whatever's functional. I was functional.
Uh-huh.
So on the way to the doctor, I spilled the beans and I told her everything, like everything that had been going on. Mm-hmm. And of course she's livid, like any normal person would be, who's been lied to for years and years and years. Mm-hmm. And also doesn't understand, what like addiction at all, has never dealt with it. And like has a pretty, at the time, a pretty negative view of it. Of people who used drugs, which is part of the reason I hid it for so long. And I got out of the car with her furious at me. And I go up to the doctor's office to get my blood results that were going to tell me I was dying. Mm-hmm. And he comes in and he's just like, "You're good. Like you're in fact, you're healthier than healthy."
Okay.
That is so bizarre. It's like the most bizarre thing. And so like I'm sitting in this office and I'm like, okay, well, I'm fine, but now cat's out of the bag. Like I'm in this bad position. And he said, "Is there anything else?" And I just told him that I had a problem and needed help. And like, he pushed like 4 patients to make sure I got in that day to see someone.
To see somebody who could help you get Suboxone.
For the chemical dependency department, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That was 2017, is that right?
Yeah, March.
Uh-huh.
March 2017.
And to the extent that you're comfortable sharing, I'm curious, after you revealed to your now wife, Sarah, that for years you were lying to her, you were hiding use. Were you living together at the time that you were hiding use?
Oh, yeah, we were married.
You were married.
We had been married.
What year did you marry?
2010.
So you've been married for 7 years and you were using secretly.
Yep.
And you share this in a car ride to the doctor's office one day when you think you're dying. How did you repair that relationship?
I had to sit and listen to someone every day kind of tell me how much I hurt them and be okay with that and not defend myself, which is what I did. And then I had to change my behavior. I mean, there's really no other way to if you're going to repair a relationship, the only way is to change behavior. Like nothing else matters. At that point, like when you're that far gone, like words don't matter. Nothing you say is going to be trusted for very good reason. Like the only thing you can do is show that like the actions I'm taking are like healthy and like, and then a while in, obviously doing this hard work on myself, she sees this massive change in me and she's like, oh, okay, like, cool. And from then on out, it's not really a thing anymore.
Did she threaten to leave you or leave you at all? Did she leave you for a period? No.
She's right or that's not her style. I mean, I'm sure that could happen. I'm not saying that would never happen, but like she was very much like, we're going to get through this. Mm-hmm. And even in her anger, she was like leaving me little positive notes. She used to like, for the first like little while, you only get small doses of Suboxone. And like at the very beginning, I had her hand them out because I just didn't really trust myself, I guess, at that point. And she left like little encouraging notes in like this little bag that she left out for me in the medicine cabinet every day, like little love notes, like we're gonna get through this, you know? So she was doing her best to not be pissed off, but like, dude, you can't not be mad. You can't not be furious with that kind of deception over that period of time.
How open are you about your history of substance use and using Suboxone now? Like, how open are you at work these days?
Well, after writing that essay, like there's not really a lot that, like, it says in there that I'm on it. It talks about my experience, but that's scary for me. And like, you technically can't get fired for stuff like that, but it can change people's minds about you. There are like, I mean, look, the community that I belong to, of people that have the problem that I have. And it's like any community, it's not a monolith. It's composed of all different types of experiences and relationships to substances themselves and reasons and all those things. But overall, when someone is actively using drugs, they go from being a human being to being a drug addict. And like, that's sort of that. And I think that even once you come back on the other side of that, there's sort of like, that's a stain. Uh-huh. That's a stink that stays with you for some people. That's not true of everyone, but it's certainly true for some people.
So it's fairly recent with the writing of this essay that you feel like you've kind of publicly come out in all of your worlds with your history of drug use?
Yeah.
Does it feel okay to have people?
So far.
Uh-huh.
I'm just not that's the thing is like, I'm just trying, like this whole idea of deep shame around it is just like something I don't want anymore. Like I'm not interested in that. Like, what am I going to do?
That's James T. Morrison. In Fresno, he's now working on his MFA in creative nonfiction at Fresno State, where he also has a job, a full-time one with benefits, as a writing coach for other grad students. There's a link to his essay in Slate in our show notes. This episode was produced by Cameron Drews. Death, Sex, and Money is produced by Slate. Please support the production of our show by becoming a member of Slate Plus. You'll not only be supporting our work on Death, Sex, and Money, you'll also get access to benefits like listening to us and all of the great shows that Slate makes, like Slow Burn and Decoder Ring, without any sponsor breaks. To subscribe to Slate Plus, just click Try Free at the top of the Death, Sex, and Money show page on Apple Podcasts, or go to slate.com/DSM Plus to get access wherever you listen. You'll be supporting the show and the people who make Death, Sex, and Money with me at Slate: Andrew Dunn, Zoe Azoulay, and Cameron Drews. Daisy Rosario is our senior supervising producer at Slate. Alicia Montgomery is Slate's head of audio. Our theme music is by the Reverend John DeLure and Steve Lewis. And if you are new to our show, welcome. We are glad you're here. You can find us and follow us on Instagram at Death, Sex, Money. My weekly Substack newsletter is at annasale.substack.com. And you can also reach us anytime with voice memos, pep talks, questions, or critiques at our email, deathsexmoney@slate.com. We love hearing from you. Oh, can I ask you one more question, James?
Yeah,
Were you ever on the streets of San Francisco when you were using, or were you always in Santa Barbara County or Fresno?
Never in the Bay.
Okay.
I mean, I used to skate in the Bay a lot. I was there for a while, but I was never on the streets there.
Do you still skate?
Yeah.
Cool.
Got the boards behind me.
Oh, uh-huh. Gosh, Californians are so cool, man.
Tell me about it.
I'm Anna Sale, and this is Death, Sex, and Money from Slate.
Here's the truth. Speeding in D.C. is dangerous and can have devastating consequences. Everyone is safer when speeds are slower. D.C. speed cameras reduce speed, save lives, and have the support of over 80% of D.C. residents. Speeding wrecks lives. Slow down. A message from the D.C. Highway Safety Office and Vision Zero D.C.